Classification of animals. Lesson 5. Amphibians. From water to land. 5 groups of vertebrate animals. All my best friends represent vertebrates. A for amphibians, M for mammals, B for birds, F for fish, R for reptiles, V for vertebrate. The 6th letter and the word helps to make this memory aid make sense. It names the bigger group the 5 groups belong to. Here we have a picture of a fish, and you'll notice the little box indicates the view of the gills in the fish. See, fish are aquatic, cold-blooded. They breathe using gills and are able to move through the water using their fins and tails, and most reproduce by spawning eggs. In today's Read Aloud, you will learn more about another group of animals, amphibians. The word amphibian means living 2 lives, or living in 2 worlds. Predict what you think this means as it pertains to the amphibians animal group. Think for a moment what it might mean. Here are some vocabulary words for you to look over as you get ready for this read aloud. Amphibians, dormant, evolved, fluctuates, morph, shed, transformation, and wetlands. I'm back, everybody, and today I've brought some excellent slides of Tabitha Toad, Paolo Piranha to show you, so we can compare how scientists classify them in the taxonomy of animals. Tabitha is not a fish, but she and Paolo are similar in many ways. It's true that Tabitha and Paolo don't look very much alike, but as the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. When classifying animals, scientists often search for similarities as well as differences. One similarity between Tabitha and Paolo is that, as you know, they are both members of the animal kingdom. You've learned that scientists classify animals as cold-blooded or warm-blooded. Does anyone know to which category Tabitha belongs? Do you think that her body maintains a constant internal temperature like yours? Or does her temperature adjust to her surroundings like a fish does? Yes, her body temperature fluctuates. So she is classified as a cold-blooded animal like Paolo. That's another way that they are similar to one another. They are both animals, and they are both cold-blooded. Now take a closer look at Tabitha Toad. Can you tell, just by looking at her, whether she is cold-blooded or warm-blooded? No, but once you learn a bit more about her habits, you will understand how scientists determined that she is cold-blooded. You know that scientists also classify animals according to whether or not they have backbones. Think about what you've learned about Tabitha's backbone. Yes, there it is. Just like you and Paolo, Tabitha has a vertebrae, a column of bones all down her back. Who remembers what scientists call animals with backbones? Right, she's a vertebrate. So Paolo and Tabitha are both cold-blooded vertebrates. Does anyone remember any other fish characteristics? Good answers. Make a prediction about which characteristics Tabitha shares with Paolo. Do Tabitha and other toads have gills, scales, or fins? Do they lay eggs or live in water? These are rather tricky questions because toads belong to a group of animals that change during their lifetime. Their bodies change, their habits change, and their habitats change. I'm going to share lots of information with you today, so get ready for some miraculous surprises. Before we go any farther, I want to introduce the name of Tabitha Toad's group of animals. Some of you may already know it. How do scientists classify toads? Yes, they are members of a class of animals known as amphibians. Most amphibians spend part of their lives in water and part on land. Who remembers what the word amphibian literally means? The word amphibian literally means living two lives, or living in two worlds. Were your predictions correct about how the meaning of the word amphibian relates to the animals? Toads love the water. Like all amphibians, Tabitha began her life as an aquatic animal, living in water. She spends most of her time on dry land now. In fact, she loves the woodlands, but every spring she makes her way to the small freshwater pond in the wetlands to lay her eggs. That's why Tabitha was in the wetlands when I took this picture of her. Just before I took this picture, she laid a few thousand eggs in shallow water. Toads must lay their eggs in water because their soft, jelly-like coverings can easily dry out in the air. Come and see. Like fish, amphibians reproduce by spawning. A male toad fertilized these eggs after the female deposited them in the water. Soon, many of them will hatch into larvae, just like fish eggs do. But most of the eggs will never hatch. Can anyone think of why this is so? There are so many ways that eggs can be destroyed. By becoming a tasty meal for a predator, being washed away in the flood, or drying up if there is not enough rain. The small percentage of eggs that do hatch will move on to the next stage of development. This is the larva stage of most frogs, toads, and salamanders. We call them tadpoles. Tadpoles have gills, just like fish, and use their gills to breathe underwater. They are herbivores and eat tiny aquatic plants, but they're in constant danger because other fish can swallow them whole. Most tadpoles don't survive, but those that do survive undergo a miraculous change. They morph or change into very different looking creatures with very different habits. This transformation process of changing appears from one stage to another. It's called metamorphosis. Notice how the word morph is part of the word metamorphosis. What are their animals morph? Caterpillars into butterflies or moths. As tadpoles grow, skin begins to cover their gills and they grow lungs so that they are able to breathe air on land. Tiny legs appear. They begin to look more like land creatures as their tails disappear. Several species of frogs that live in wet tropical rainforests skip the tadpole stage. Their eggs hatch in the younger miniature versions of the adult frog. The sternum toad eggs develop in pores on the adult's back until they emerge fully developed. Whew. Those amphibians that survive to adulthood will be hopping and crawling around on land, searching for food just like Tabitha. Plant life will no longer interest them. Instead, they will snatch up bugs, worms, spiders, and slugs with their sticky tongues. Most adult amphibians are carnivores. Some of the toad's larger relatives, like bullfrogs, even eat small mammals and birds. The world's biggest frog is the Western African Goliath frog. It is the size of a pet cat and eats other frogs, baby crabs, and snakes. Frogs and toads are the largest group of amphibians because they have so many of the same characteristics. Many people have a difficult time telling them apart. The main difference between them is that toad's skin is a bit drier than frog's skin. Remember that although together they make up the largest group of amphibians, they are not the only group of amphibians. In order to study amphibians better, scientists classify them into 3 separate groups. Have you ever seen a salamander? Scientists classify salamanders and their closest relatives, newts, as a second, separate category of amphibians. Perhaps you've seen these four-legged tailed animals while hiking in the woods or even in your own backyard. Sometimes salamanders are confused with lizards, but salamanders are amphibians. Lizards belong to another group of animals that we will talk about another day. Skin is one of the amphibian's most important organs. Tabitha and the other toads like her have skin that is dry and leathery. Other amphibians have slimy skin because their skin needs to stay moist in order to let them breathe. Amphibians use their lungs to breathe on land, but also draw oxygen in through their skin. In order for this process to work properly, the skin of most amphibians must be kept moist. A word of caution here: when you handle frogs and salamanders, be sure to keep the animal moist so their skin doesn't dry out. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to get the oxygen they need. In order to stay wet, amphibians will hop into water or crawl beneath a moist log. Most frogs, toads, and salamanders molt or shed their skins, often eating their own skins for extra nutrients once they shed. The third, smallest group of amphibians live deep underground. Look at this picture and see if you recognize them. What do you see? They do look like earthworms, don't they? But earthworms are not amphibians. Rather, these tube-like creatures, not nearly as common as earthworms, belong to the group of amphibians known as caecilians, or slowworms. They look a bit like other amphibians, only without legs. They need very wet conditions and live in tropical or warm climates only. These interesting animals range in size from only about 5 inches to more than 5 feet long. They have very sharp teeth and large jaws. And guess what? Caecilians have 2 lungs. These legless pattern breakers live most of their lives underground, coming up only occasionally to feed. Whew, look at those. Today, amphibians live everywhere on Earth except Antarctica. Because these cold-blooded vertebrates depend on moisture to live, many of them live in tropical rainforests or near rivers, lakes, and streams. Amphibians that live in cold climates become dormant as their bodies slow down in winter, burrowing deep underground or burying themselves in the top layer of mud at the bottom of ponds to stay warm. Dormant amphibians hibernate, living off stored energy for months at a time. Next time we meet, you will learn about the way scientists classify snakes, like anaconda. I'll give you a hint. Remember when I said that salamanders are often mistaken for lizards, but that lizards belong to a different group of animals? Well, Anna belongs to the same group of lizards. Does anyone want to predict the name of that group? Wait and see if you're right. For now, I want to congratulate you all on being such good sleuths or detectives. Any taxonomist would love to have your help in classifying Earth's animals. See you soon! Were your predictions correct about how amphibians and fish are similar or different? Why or why not? Answers may vary, but should include amphibians live partially on land and partially in the water. Many amphibians begin life underwater, and as they grow, they live mostly on land, etc. How are amphibians and fish alike, and how are they different? Both begin life underwater, breathe using gills, reproduce by laying eggs, and are cold-blooded vertebrates. Amphibians live on land and in water, whereas fish live entirely in water. Amphibians' gills develop in the lungs. What do you mean when they say amphibians morph? They change or transform from one stage of life to the next. In what longer word can the shortened word morph be found? Metamorphosis. Do you think it is likely that an amphibian would shed its skin when it's going through metamorphosis? Why? Yes, as amphibians are going through this period of change, they shed their skins so they can grow. In this read aloud, you heard that amphibians' body temperature fluctuates. What does this mean? It shifts back and forth. Knowing that their temperatures fluctuate, what does that tell you about whether amphibians are cold-blooded or warm-blooded? They are cold-blooded because their body temperatures are not constant. They shift depending on their surroundings. After toads become adults and live on dry land, why do they go back to the wetlands every spring? To to lay eggs. In the read aloud, you heard that in places that get very cold, some amphibians bury themselves underground and become dormant. What is meant by the word dormant? Existing in a state of rest or inactivity. Why is this important for these animals? It helps them keep from freezing or drying out. In the read aloud today, you learned that a tadpole and a type of baby amphibian breathe through gills like fish because they live primarily underwater. How do adult frogs breathe? With lungs and through their skin. What do you mean when we say that scientists study fossils to learn more about how amphibians may have evolved? They're trying to learn how the animals may have changed slowly or over a long period of time. Have students... Okay, this is where you're going to use your classification journals to answer this question. Write 2 or 3 complete sentences that identify the major characteristics of amphibians. For example, amphibians are cold-blooded, they live in and out of water, and lay eggs. So those are the 3 sentences that you can write down in your journal. I'm going to ask you a question and give you a minute to think about the question, then turn to your neighbor and discuss the question, and then call on several of you to share. As background information, before the read aloud, you learned that the word amphibian means living 2 lives, or 2 worlds. Describe the transformation amphibians go through in their lifetime. Be sure to discuss the first part of the life, what makes it so different from the second part of life. So you'll discuss that with your partner at your table, and then get back with me on that. Here are some examples of what you might say. First part of life is an egg and tadpole, then the larva stage, then it morphs, all that fun stuff, and then it becomes lungs and grows legs, and it's a totally different animal. Okay, word work shed. In this read aloud, you heard most frogs, toads, and salamanders molt or shed their skins, often eating their own skins. You learned the word shed means to drop off, cast off, or separate from something. Here's some examples of the word shed for you to read. Think about something that you have shed. Use the word shed in a sentence. Making choices. I'm going to name some actions. If what I name is an example of something that's being shed, you say this is something being shed. If it is not, you say nothing. Taking off your jacket, scarf, or sweater. Oh, I need to fix that. At any rate, these are the options that should be shed, and those are the 2 that cannot be shed. Putting your toys away and putting on a hat. Alrighty. There's another activity for you to do in class. Raise your hand if statements. So if it's true versus if it's false. Fish are amphibians. Toads are amphibians. Amphibians breathe through their skin. Amphibians are invertebrates, are cold-blooded, go through a transformation called metamorphosis. The word amphibian means living 2 lives. So which statements of those are true and which ones of those are false? I'll give you a minute. Well, less than a minute. More like a second or 2. There we go. You should have raised your hand for all of those following things. Very good. And there's where you're going to write the type of animal and the characteristics about that animal in the bubbles around it. And that is it for this lesson. We'll see you in the next one, kids. Thank you.